Now, the rest of the story. Attorney Isaac Arnold was having second thoughts about all of this. He could now not imagine how he'd gotten involved in the first place. To begin with, the litigants and the lawyers preparing for trial that day were all friends, longtime friends. The 56-year-old widow whose freedom was about to be taken away from her, the son who was attempting to do so, and who had been accused of trying to poison his mother, the attorney who was helping son Bob put his mother away. Then there was Isaac Arnold, another friend of the family, for more than 30 years, in fact. Ostensibly, lawyer Arnold would be representing the hapless widow today, and yet his services had been carefully calculatedly enlisted by Bob and opposing counsel Leonard Swett, and they had come to him and said, in effect, that this woman must be institutionalized, and that if they did not catch her by surprise, she would have time to mount a convincing defense. Put Bob's mother in a mental institution? Arnold shook his head. He'd always known she was eccentric, but an asylum? Do you have any expert testimony to support that, Arnold asked. Oh, they did indeed, that of 5 doctors. She has been examined, Arnold exclaimed, by 5 doctors? Well, no, not exactly. She had been examined by no one, in fact. The aforementioned physicians, once again, were family friends. As a family favor, they would testify that mother was insane. Isaac Arnold's role was to take Bob's mother as his client, but then not defend her. You're not after her money, are you? Arnold asked nervously. Bob answered that he would of course control his mother's estate after the inevitable pronouncement, for it seemed that she would otherwise eventually spend all of her money on things she did not need. And so without asking, Arnold realized something else. In the event that Bob's mother were later to die under suspicious circumstances, and in light of her accusation that her own son had once tried to poison her, Bob's most convincing defense would be that her accusation was insanity. So Arnold, despite a last-minute attack of conscience that almost postponed the trial, proceeded with that sham, presented no contrary expert testimony. The all-male jury deliberated for only 10 minutes before rendering the verdict that Bob's mother indeed belonged in a state mental institution, and she was taken away. A second trial more than a year later would reverse the finding of the first, so Bob's mother, released from the asylum, her estate restored to her, lived the remainder of her life as a free woman, but once upon a kangaroo court. In Chicago, May 19, 1875, in the days when benign neuroses were neither understood nor forgiven, there was a son who slam-dunked his mother with a little help from family friends. I know you'd thought the excitement ended with the death of Bob's father. But now you know that the family melodrama was only beginning, aided and abetted by old chums who cared little for Mother Mary, but who dared not disappoint Bob. For Bob was Robert Todd Lincoln. That's right. Bob was the only surviving son of Abraham Lincoln. And now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. I've always heard that Mary Todd Lincoln had fits of lunacy. But are these stories true? Let's take a closer look at Mary. Mary Todd was born in December 1818 in Lexington, Kentucky. She was born the 4th of 7 children. On July 2, 1825, when Mary was 6 years old, her mother, Eliza, gave birth to a son they named George. Eliza's delivery had complications, and although the baby boy was healthy, Eliza was not. 31-year-old Elizabeth Eliza Ann Parker Todd died from complications 3 days after giving birth. In the following year, 1826, Mary's father, Robert Smith Todd, married Elizabeth Humphreys. Robert and Elizabeth had 9 children together, 8 of which survived to adulthood. By 1832, the family needed a larger house. Robert, a successful banker, bought the elegant 14-room home behind me, which was originally built as an inn. It was the perfect setup for the large family. The home is now a museum called the Mary Todd House. Robert recognized something special in Mary. She was intelligent and more independent than other girls her age. While most young women in her social class ended their formal educations after only about 4 or 5 years, Robert furnished Mary with a superior formal education which lasted 9 years. She spent 5 years at Shelby Female Academy and 4 more at a boarding school run by Augustus and Charlotte Mintel, both of whom were immigrants who fled Paris during the French Revolution. In September 1820, they opened Mintel School for Young Ladies in Lexington, which was advertised as being very academic and very French. Mary excelled in her education and learned French, geography, literature, social etiquette, and dancing. Living with the Mintels, Mary gained a lifelong love of reading and learning and knowledge of the world, which fueled her desire to leave Lexington. In 1839, Mary and her 2 sisters, Frances and Anne, moved in with her older sister Elizabeth and her husband Ninian Edwards in this house in Springfield, Illinois. Ninian, a politician and son of former Illinois governor, frequently hosted lavish parties, and their home functioned as a sort of social hub of Springfield at the time. It was at one of these parties in 1839 that Mary met Stephen Douglas. You thought I was going to say Abraham Lincoln, didn't you? Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln later became political rivals leading up to the presidential election of 1860, but in 1839, Stephen Douglas was one of the many suitors of Mary Todd. There were rumors that Stephen Douglas was going to propose to Mary. But that all changed when Abraham Lincoln met her at one of her sister's parties. After a 3-year courtship, Mary and Abraham married on November the 4th, 1842, in the same house in which they met. Mary and Abraham had 4 children. Robert Todd Lincoln was born in 1843 and was the only child of Mary's to outlive her. Edward Baker Eddie Lincoln was born in 1846 and died in 1850 of tuberculosis. In that same year, 1850, William Wallace Willie Lincoln was born. He died in 1862 of typhoid fever while Lincoln was president. In 1853, Thomas Tad Lincoln was born. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in April 1865. In 1871, Tad Lincoln died from what they called dropsy of the heart, well, now commonly referred to as edema, which is a buildup of fluid around the heart. Imagine losing your spouse and 3 of your 4 children. Heartbreaking. Mary had an obsession with spending money. During the Civil War, she bought bracelets, diamond rings, brooches, fans, cuff pins, shawl pins, bouquet holders, teaspoons, coffee spoons, and enameled pins from Galton Brothers Incorporated. Galton Brothers was located on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., just down the street from the White House. In 1861, famed Civil War photographer Matthew Brady took this photo of Mary. Her jewelry included a diamond and pearl bracelet and matching necklace, which cost $550. Adjusted for inflation, that would be about $20,000 in today's money. When President Lincoln was assassinated, Mary still owed a considerable amount of money to the jewelry store. The store agreed to take some items back and forgave much of the debt. While First Lady, Mary was known for her terrible temper and sour disposition. Following one of her angry outbursts, President Lincoln's assistant private secretary nicknamed Mary the Hellcat. In March 1865, Abraham and Mary Lincoln visited the front in Richmond, Virginia. Naval officer John S. Barnes wrote that Mary was at no time well. The mental strain upon her was great, betrayed by extreme nervousness approaching hysteria, causing misapprehension, extreme sensitiveness as to slights, or want of politeness or consideration. I had the greatest sympathy for her and for Mr. Lincoln, who I am sure felt deep anxiety for her. Mary was under a pressure that most of us could never imagine. But there's one other possibility for Mary's mental illness. During his presidency, Mary and Abraham found some respite by taking carriage rides to nowhere in particular. On July the 3rd, 1863, on one outing, Mary was seriously injured when she was thrown from her carriage near Mount Pleasant Hospital and hit her head. Doctors treated a large gash on her head, and she eventually returned to the White House to recover. The head injury certainly could have added to Mary's mental illness. On another carriage outing, Abraham turned to Mary and said, "I consider this day, the war has come to a close. We must both be more cheerful in the future. Between the war and the loss of our darling Willie, we have both been very miserable." Their destination on this outing was Ford's Theater, where he was assassinated a short time later. After Abraham's death, Mary was too grief-stricken to do much of anything. It took over a month for her to recover enough to leave the White House. For the remainder of her life, she was consumed by physical and mental illness. She was scarred by the personal tragedies. And because of her temper tantrums and excessive spending, she was shamed by her family as well as the country. In 1868, Mary moved to Europe to escape the public controversies surrounding her finances. 3 years later, she returned to the United States and settled in Chicago, where her excessive spending began again. On May 19, 1875, Mary appeared in a Chicago courtroom. Her only surviving son, Robert, was so concerned for her safety that he felt he had no choice but to have the court determine her sanity. Newspapers reported it as one of the saddest spectacles ever witnessed in a courtroom in this city. Eminent medical men pronounced her to be of unsound mind and incapable of self-care. During the trial, one of her doctors, Willis Danforth, said he treated Mary in 1873 for fever and nervous derangement of the head, which included hallucinations. Mary believed someone was at work in her head. She said an Indian was removing the bones of her face and pulling wires out of her eyes. The doctor explained that he treated her again in 1874 when she complained that someone was taking steel springs from her head and would not let her rest. She believed that Abraham was sending her messages from the grave that she was going to die within a few days. She imagined that she heard raps on the table conveying the time of death. She sat by the table and asked questions and repeated the supposed answers the table returned. Witnesses saw Mary mix several kinds of medicines together, which she quickly swallowed. There were numerous other examples. Mary showed no emotion during the trial and showed no annoyance toward Robert until the court found her insane. After the verdict, Robert approached his mother, took her hand, and spoke to her affectionately. Mary responded, "Oh, Robert, to think that my son would ever have done this." Robert turned his head to conceal his grief. History has deemed Robert a villain, but that's unfair. When called to testify, Robert appeared pale and had been weeping. When detailing his mother's actions, he cried openly on the stand. Mary was sent to a private insane asylum at Batavia, Illinois. In August 1875, after 3 months in the asylum, Mary was said to be so far recovered from her recent attack of dementia that she will leave the asylum for Springfield, where she will remain with her sister Elizabeth. Mary moved back into the home where she had met Abraham Lincoln, in the same home in which she had married him. On July 15, 1882, Mary had a stroke and collapsed into a coma. She died the following morning. Mental illness, such as dementia, is a horrible, horrible thing to witness. And we can only speculate on what it must be like for the person experiencing the illness. If you know someone who's struggling and is not acting as they normally would, please have them see a doctor. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions, such as Robert had to make, for their own safety. But just remember that anyone who takes this sort of action is not a villain. They're acting out of love. Robert loved his mother. Now, before I go, I just want to briefly mention my upcoming book. It's called The Trap, The Untold Story of Sheriff Henderson Jordan in the Final Pursuit of Bonnie and Clyde. It comes out May 23rd, the anniversary of the ambush, but you can pre-order it directly from me. The first 100 copies of the book will be numbered editions. You can scan this QR code or visit hendersonjordan.com to get a copy. I hope you enjoy it. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.